and welcome to Crafting a Revolution, the podcast. My name is Katie Freeman, and I'm one of your hosts. Every week, we bring you interviews with makers and artists of all kinds from all over the world that identify as female, non-binary, or transgender. Today's guest is really a guest revisited. Her name is Laura Mays. She has a degree in architecture from University College Dublin and a higher certificate in furniture design and manufacture from GMIT Letterfrack. She followed that with 2 years on the Fine Woodworking program in College of the Redwoods in California. Laura completed an MA in industrial design at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. Since 2011, Laura has been the program director of the Fine Woodworking program at the Krenov School in Northern California. She is the founding president of the Krenov Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to support the craft of fine woodworking in Northern California by conducting educational programs and providing material and financial support to individuals and institutions in that field. I previously had Laura on back in October of 2019. I think we ended up deciding on right before she was going to be putting on a show, jointly putting on a show called Making a Seat that highlighted, I think, 10 artists, female artists in wood. So it was right before that I had a chance to talk with her. And I reached back out to her because I wanted to see what was new, what's going on now, where are things at now, after the pandemic, after so much around just equity and craft going on over the last 3 years. I thought it was great to reach back out to her and get to chat with her. Before heading into the conversation with Laura, I want to give a shout out and thanks to the patrons over on Patreon. So thank you so much, Matthew from Artigiano Serio, for being our big main sponsor right now. Candice of CJ Woodgrain, Lee at Lee Runyon, Annette 513 Woodworks, Katie Thompson, Women of Woodworking, Kevin Lefty's Woodshop, Christy Twisted Twine, Jeremy Speece, Sammy Go Sammy Lee, Rachel Moody Makes, Laura Oakley Soap Company, Brandy Studio Obey, Ellen Little Bear Furniture, and Ethan Carter Designs. Thank you all so very much for your continued support, really making this podcast happen every week. Also, before hopping into the conversation, I just wanted to let everyone know I will be out on vacation with my family, so this will be the only episode for this week. We will be skipping next week entirely and be back with the next brand new episode on Wednesday, the 17th. But I always encourage you to go back, listen to past episodes, and get to know the makers and artists that you admire better. All right, let's head on into the conversation with Laura Mays. Well, I want to start since, there's a chance that maybe somebody didn't listen to the earlier episode and give you a chance to introduce yourself again. Would you do that for me?
Sure. My name is Laura Mays, and I'm a woodworker and an educator in Northern California, Fort Bragg. I'm from Ireland originally. For the past 11 years, I'm going to have to update that every year. 11 years, I've been the director at the Krenov School, which is formerly the College of the Redwoods, the woodworking program there.
Mm-hmm. I still have it on my bucket list to, at the very least, take a chair making class from you. Like, I really want to do that. Maybe, yeah, retirement's way too far off for me. I was gonna say maybe in retirement I can come take some classes at Krenov.
Yeah, well, we'll be here. Maybe you should try a little sooner.
Yeah.
Remember, woodworkers never retire.
This is true. Yeah, and I saw recently, well, semi-recently, I guess, you went to Penland. Were you teaching or taking a class there?
I was teaching. That was last summer. That was last June. It was just in that little window of the pandemic when we all thought everything was going to get better.
Right.
Turns out we were wrong. But anyway, it was, yeah, that was an amazing experience. It was so good.
Was that your first time to Finland?
Yes, my first time in a southern state.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I was just so astounded at how beautiful it was. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, that was one of the things, was that just it was so gorgeous there. And then such a good environment there. It was just great. I didn't realize how much I would appreciate being around other crafts and other disciplines and people as equally as kind of, you know, nerdy about whatever it was that they were doing.
Right.
People making or printing or glass or clay or whatever. As the wood people are. I've just been around wood people for so much. I was like, why would I want to talk to anybody else? But turns out I did.
That's actually one of the things that I love about having a podcast, is getting to talk to people who are like super passionate about whatever medium they're in. And Penland is also one of those places that I want to take some classes there, but I do hope eventually someday I will get to teach some classes there as well. It's on my list. So last time I chatted with you was, I want to say it was like the spring of the year that making a seat was done, which was done in the fall, correct? I think it was like October.
Yeah, it started in, I think, October of 2019 and then ran into January, I think, of 2020. I know, because then that, you know, March 2020 is a date I can actually remember.
Right. I agree. That's when everything shut down, right?
That's when everything changed. Yeah.
Yes.
So it ran just up to the pandemic, and in the Center for Art and Wood in Philadelphia.
Yeah. How was that experience? And maybe how was that experience looking back at it now compared to the altered universe we live in now?
Yeah. Well, one of the things was there was just so many kind of like parties, or not exactly parties, but there was like an opening for the show. And in fact, the opening for the show, I think, was one of the most moving sort of occasions of I mean, it sounds a little dramatic, but to say of my life, it was a very moving occasion. There were so many women gathered together, and their supporters and all kinds, and non-conforming, gender non-conforming people, and there was just a very much celebration of the work that was there. Put the poster there on the wall behind me.
Yep.
Well, the work was so gorgeous and like diverse and amazing, and so were the people, and it felt very much like this big kind of celebration and almost like a change happening or something, you know. Like here were all these great people, you know, these great woodworkers. It was very moving.
Do you think there's gonna be room for more of that?
You know, at the time I thought so. I thought, well, you know, it's not like we were gonna go for an annual event or anything like that, but I feel almost like the world has moved on. Well, it has, clearly, but I wonder if it's moved on from that as its kind of chief concern, even in the world of woodworking. I feel like gender is almost the easiest problem to solve.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
But it's the easier problem. And I think that kind of race and kind of, I mean, I know it's not a word that's used as much over here, but, you know, class or kind of socioeconomic diversity is really lacking. And also just a kind of a question of what it is we're doing, because I think that is tied in with like who is doing woodworking. It's like why we're doing it and what we're doing and things like that. So I think those are really interesting. And I also think, I mean, clearly we need a planet on which to do woodworking. And so that is kind of like, maybe that is the most pressing
Yeah.
issue of all.
Have you, in the circles that you've been in, have there been conversations about how, like, as a woodworker, we can contribute to, turning the tide of kind of climate crisis type stuff, or how we interact with that, specific issue?
No, not really, actually. I think there's a kind of assumption that we are kind of we're kind of the good guys.
Mm.
But I don't agree with that assumption, really. I think that because we're part of the world,
Yeah.
we're part of the problem, something that I've become really, a group that I've become very fascinated by is a former phantasma. Sorry, I'm looking for the catalog. I know.
Yeah, no problem.
Right here, because I don't know where it is now. It's usually right beside me, so I can pull it out. Italian design duo who designed a show in, I think it was first in London and has moved around a bit, about the kind of the timber industry, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that the kind of woodworkers we are hardly even involved in the timber industry because the amount that we use is minuscule. But insofar as we are, that is the kind of that's the material that we use.
Right.
And it's they describe it at one point as so big that you actually can't see it. It's so much kind of embedded that it's actually difficult to see because it's so huge. It's like you can't see the thing that is around you, And the timber industry is just massive and deeply implicated in so much of the so many of the problems. I also just read a book called Mahogany, which is mahogany, and it's also you see how kind of tied into all the issues of the era. So mahogany, was exploited in the kind of 17th and 18th centuries, mostly. So it's really tied into, colonialism and slavery and deforestation and kind of just the things that were happening. Timber is part of it.
Yep.
Whatever's going on in the world, wood is part of it.
Yeah.
If not actually directly responsible, it's kind of entangled with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a material used for so much, right? It's been a material, to your point, that was used to build the ships that then colonized all of the other continents. It was used to build the railway systems that were used to, slave labor basically to build. So it's definitely there. I think as a woodworker, I've been trying to focus on what my role is, directly in relation to the material that I use. And I know that, at least personally, I pretty much source all of my lumber from urban lumber that's, felled for disease, or, there's a reason basically that lumber was felled, other than just the fact that we're clear cutting this area or we're whatever. I've done that since the start, more than anything, just because I think there's also a story there of community and connecting to the local kind of environment. But then also researching and looking more and more into how do we reuse all that timber that we right now are just throwing into a landfill. And there's several designers, furniture design companies that have sprung up just around that and reuse of material to create. And I'm pretty sure that's the direction we're going to have to go. Especially since I don't think anybody has been talking about it, at least in my circles, the implications of the most recent stuff that the US has agreed to, no more deforestation by 2030, which in reality is not a lot of years away, and it's a good thing. But that's going to include timber industry. So I don't know if people understand to your point, wood is so big, like all the things that are going to change because of that.
Yeah, I hadn't. I should follow up on what you're talking about. I mean, one thing to kind of distinguish between is between softwoods and hardwoods. I mean, softwoods are so much, in a way, more used because of
Mhm.
the use in the construction industry.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I like on a personal level, I feel like that's not going to impact the
Yeah.
likes of us because
Yeah.
like we're kind of like scrappy and around the
Yeah.
edges,
Yeah.
and reusing is gonna be fine, because we
Yep.
make smaller things. You take bigger bits of wood and make them
Yep.
smaller, and kind of like trees that are kind of like weeds almost. Especially
Mhm.
around here, for redwoods and Doug fir are the commercial kind of crops,
Yep.
and things like madrone and tan oak and bay laurel and everything other kind of like the weeds that grow up in the understory, and so nobody wants them really, so they're kind of available
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
used.
Well, and again, I've noticed too on some of the stuff you're sharing that you've been doing more reuse just with your own home and the work you've been doing around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting because there I was happily pulling all this redwood out of my house, and then tested the paint on it, and it turned out it had lead paint
Right.
on it. It totally freaked me out. I just left it in the backyard for like 3 months while I kind of like, what do I do? And then I took it to the landfill. I wasn't going to deal with it.
Yeah.
I did not want to go down the route of stripping it off with a chemical. Like, people gave me lots and lots of really good suggestions,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that they would have kind of probably been fine, but stripping it off with chemicals, or cleaning it off, or all kinds of ways of getting rid of it. But I don't know, maybe that's like my own kind of like luxury or something, that I was able to be like, no, not doing it. But around here there is actually so much redwood that is kind of floating around, well, sometimes literally, but yeah, I mean, just kind of like in buildings that doesn't have paint on it. I was like, well, I can just, I can still use reused redwood, but just not some wood that's been painted.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was you, wasn't it, about the sinker logs? You
Yeah.
posted about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
have redwood sinker logs around here, but we do still have quite a few that are in our rivers. But nobody's been pulling them up. And I wonder if it's because of what you said towards the end there about the disturbing of ecosystems that have now been built around those.
Right. Yeah. Although when I looked up sinker logs, I just Googled sinker, because I didn't. A lot came up from Maine, from all those trees, and also down in Cyprus, down in the southern states. So yeah, but I couldn't really tell how much it was going on kind of currently.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is that at this point they're pretty embedded, literally, in the soil of the river.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Although it was interesting when I talked to the guy that I got it from, Redwood Tony.
Yeah.
His nemesis was this lawyer who eventually managed to kind of get the state of California to stop them pulling this wood out of the rivers on the basis of the habitat. But before that, the same lawyer had tried to stop them pulling the logs out on the basis of ownership. And it made me think that the lawyer maybe had just a thing that he didn't want these guys pulling the logs up.
Right.
And then was trying to find reasons for them not to do it. I have no idea. That's just,
right.
But he had first, the lawyer had first tried to use the argument that these logs belonged to either the state of California, he tried that, but also maybe to the families of the loggers, because loggers weren't paid until the log reached its destination, which I don't know if the destination was the mill or the ship, or I don't know what counts as destination, and therefore the descendants of the loggers should be being given the proceeds of these trees, these logs. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting to see the kind of the arguments that could be made about like ownership of these.
Right. I guess I didn't realize, because I thought, like when I was in California, I thought it was illegal to cut redwoods down.
No, it's not. It's illegal to cut down old growth redwoods, but it's there's quite a lot of logging of like second, and at this point there's even third growth, So these
Mhm.
trees that are like 40 years old or 60, whatever,
Yeah.
that are big enough at this point to be cut down.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, redwood is one of the construction materials around here. It's slightly more expensive, but it's very, because of its qualities, it's pretty
Yeah.
used.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe, maybe I'm thinking the old growth.
Yeah.
Because I had obtained a bit of old growth when I was there that was like one of those deals where it like naturally fell on
Mhm.
somebody's property. And so then they could mill it
Yeah.
up at that point. So I got captured it there. I made a clock out of it.
Mhm.
I don't understand anybody who would attempt to make furniture out of it because you look at it sideways and it dents. Or
I know. Oh my God. Yeah, you're like, I did nothing. A piece of dust landed on you,
right.
wood. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's bizarre in its
Yeah.
qualities in that regard. It's also really hard to cut joinery in because it's so soft. But yeah, I know. I'm like, how can you be a good construction material?
I
But
don't know. Yes.
it has a very good like strength to weight ratio.
Yeah.
And stuff like
Yeah.
that. Very good rot resistance. Yeah, it's not actually a great furniture wood by any means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is a good rot resistant, pest resistant. It's also pretty fire resistant.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. Yeah.
so
I was
all of
just
that
reading
makes it.
about how the 1906 San Francisco fire was almost like a marketing campaign
Yep.
for Redwood because they noticed that the buildings that were built with redwood construction were standing, whereas the other ones weren't. So it was
Yep.
like, oh, we should build out of redwood.
Yes.
More fire
Yeah.
resistant.
We have the same issue with cedar here in the Midwest. So in the sense of like lots of people like cedar wood benches and stuff like that. And that's one that I boggle my mind at again, because it's like piece of dust lands on you and something happens to you. And I don't like, I've even tried carving cedar and the thing just like completely disintegrated, like it just went,
Yeah.
halfway through. And I'm like, what? I didn't do anything to you. So yeah,
Mhm.
similar. I'm not a fan of working with the softwoods. We'll just say that.
Mhm. They're hard. I mean, they're not hard. They're difficult.
Yes, there you go. How do you source your hardwoods then there in Northern California?
Well, at this point, I mostly kind of buy from the school. And the school gets it. Well, we've got an amazing kind of like backlog, so to speak,
Gotcha.
inventory of wood that has been kind of gathered over the years, but it gets replenished all the time. And at this point, people kind of come by this school sometimes and be like, I've got a beautiful piece of bay laurel, should I plank it up for you guys? Or because there are these kind of like small scale millers up around here, and when they find something nice, they'll bring it over. Or we got an absolute kind of treasure trove of rosewood, which is not something that I would have ever thought to use, and I haven't used it yet. But it was from a guy who was retiring from woodworking. He was kind of like closing down his shop, and he'd got all this stuff in the 1980s when it was still legal to buy and sell rosewood, and he just gave it to the school. So we got all this gorgeous rosewood. So yeah, it just kind of like almost like lands on us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we have a graduate from way back. He was actually in my class when I was a student, Martin Goebel, who's over in St. Louis, and he is a fairly, well, not large scale, but he turns over quite a lot of wood. And one of the places he gets urban lumber, and he sometimes sends us out a few planks. So it just kind of like arrives to us. I mean, sometimes I mean, I really dislike going to lumber yards. I remember back in the days when I went to lumber yards more, I used to dread it. I'd be like feeling kind of like sick for 2 days beforehand. Like, I don't want to go. I don't want to deal with the guys. They're going to be so rude and everything. And yeah, so I really like the fact that I actually haven't been to a lumber yard in probably 4 or 5 years. Although, having said that, I did go to Eden, so up in Port Townsend. I was just teaching up in Port Townsend in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and we went on a field trip to the lumberyard called Edensaw, and absolutely amazing lumberyard, and they seemed like they had absolutely zero issues with helping women and helping people who wanted to buy a small amount of wood, which is always the issue. Like, for starters, I only want to buy 1 or 2 planks, and secondly, I'm a woman, so that was always the issue going to the wood yards. It's like, I don't know which of those is worse, for you, but it's like a double whammy for you guys. But Edensaw seemed great, so maybe lumberyards are changing. I don't know.
I do think it's a matter of where you're at, and I mean, there's a couple local that I've gone to, or smaller sawmills that I go to, and usually the number one issue is I pull up in a minivan, so I get like a look of like, you're in a minivan, like soccer mom, and I'm like, I can fit 10-foot boards in this thing. This thing rocks. So that, but usually once I throw out like 4/4 or 8/4, like a terminology that shows that I deserve, quote unquote, deserve to be there, then I get a bit more respect. But yeah, usually that first, I would say you're not alone. Most people are, of most non-cis het white males, don't enjoy going to a lumber yard.
Yeah, when we did the interviews for the Making a Seat at the Table book, or show, or it was the lumberyard was one of the kind of focuses of people's kind of like frustration with the whole affair.
Yeah, I would say there, and then like, the hardware stores or the tool stores. Yeah. It's one of those things that still drives me nuts. It's like, it takes about 3 or 4 times for me to come into a place and show that I know what I know and what I'm looking for to gain respect in that space. And I don't know, it's not fair, but it's also one of those things of like, okay, maybe you understanding this about me means you'll be nicer to the next like woman who walks in this place. I don't know. I was gonna say I have a similar issue of things just showing up at my shop, but mine comes from like sawyers and is it arborists? The people who are cut down the trees.
Oh yeah, the arborists. Well, that's good.
Yeah. So I just come home to like a present sitting outside of my garage. Yeah.
Sometimes people have bizarre ideas about what is useful. Sometimes people are like, you guys make small things, and they'll bring over this like tiny piece of wood. Like, thank you.
Exactly. So the book. So that came out during pandemic days.
That came out. Well, it was March this year, I think. March 2022.
Now, I mean, so Deidre was writing it, but you were helping, correct?
Well, the up until I think the end of 2020, we were working on it together. But that fall of 2020, so I went back to teaching full time in the fall of 20. It's just basically impossible to teach a kind of craft online. So I went back to teaching, but I was it was complicated, but I ended up being the only teacher because we had a reduced number of students and reduced number of hours. So I was teaching kind of, it seemed like more than ever, and we were wearing masks, and we had all the windows open, so we were also like wearing all of our clothes, and we all thought we were going to die because it was before vaccines, and it was a very stressful fall semester, and I was homeschooling my daughter, or at least like plonking her in front of the computer and making sure that the links were there, and trying to like keep up with like printouts for her homework and everything. Anyway, it was just a crazy fall, and I couldn't. I was like, okay, something's got to go. I can't keep this up. I was basically I wasn't even working on the book. I was just feeling guilty about not working.
Right.
Time, and it was like this burden of guilt was terrible, and I had to back out of the kind of joint authorship. So Deirdre took the book onwards then to publication.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Finished writing it. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
really great book and really, really worthwhile having in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like though kind of similar to my questioning about, is making a seat gonna kind of continue on with a different show. I wonder if like now it's like you jump right into like we need another book of what maybe what we want craft to look like and those who need to be represented in the fields. Yeah.
Well, another thing I discovered was that I don't actually enjoy writing that much. So someone could write that book, but it's not going to be me. I think like Instagram posts is about it's about my my form.
Yeah.
Or I guess I discovered about myself that I'm not very good at researching. I thought that writing would be kind of like designing something.
Yeah.
I feel like I do have a reasonable process for designing an object, of like, keeping an open mind, but also trying to move forward, and just all the things one goes through. And I figured that writing would somehow be the same, and it is kind of like analogous, but it's not the same. But it's
Yes.
so it's not directly transferable. In other words, if you're it didn't make me into a good writer. I was not very good at keeping an open mind, I think. I would like enter with an idea and then
you're just proving trying to prove your idea.
Try to prove my ideas, which is exactly not what you're supposed to do, and I feel like it's weird because I don't feel like I do that necessarily with a design. I feel like I'm quite willing to like, do a give and take kind of in that process. Anyway, yeah, I found I was not that, and it also didn't make me very happy. It wasn't a joyous activity for me. So
I think though too, like that book specifically, maybe because I remember in the conversation with you and Deidre was like her aim a bit was to have it accessible like as a textbook. Like so there is amount of research going into it versus maybe just the act of storytelling as you or like whoever you're interviewing or talking to might have. I could see that being a difference. Like I am 100% on board with like I don't know if I really want to spend hours upon hours of like researching to see like where all the data takes me, but I do enjoy the art of storytelling, and I think that is what pulls me into the things that I read is maybe less about it was well researched versus it was a story well told.
Yeah.
Which you get to do on Instagram, to your point. Like you get to tell the story but the way you want to tell it.
Yeah.
So crazy times at kind of 2020 teaching, homeschooling your daughter, which bless you for doing that. I learned early on that was not going to be my path. I was like, we're finding whatever way we can for that.
Oh yeah,
to be my path.
Luckily her school did. I think it was the spring of 21. Then they put up tents and they started to bring in the kids at like 2-4 hour stints a week into these tents, and I mean the tents blew away and they had to like everything, kind of everything happened, but they still kept on going. I mean her school was fantastic, but it was that fall of 2020 was kind of like not the worst, but it was
hard.
None of us knew what was going on,
right? Yeah, exactly.
The uncertainty was quite high.
Yes. Yes. But since then, has Krenov kind of opened back up all full scale?
So we have kind of like crept up in the numbers. Last year we had 13. So normally there are 23 students.
Okay.
We had 13 in the last academic year. We're going to have 18 in the next academic year. So we're still not up to full numbers, which actually I think, it might be kind of, when I look back at photographs of in the before times, and I'm like, oh my God, we're all standing so close to each other. It's disgusting. And we actually used to joke that it was like a petri dish. You could actually like see a
Yeah.
flu
Yeah.
or a cold like go down the room
Right.
and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, well, maybe let's just see how it goes with 18.
Right.
Might be better. Of course, we're part of the community college system, and they get their money by from the state by the number of
Right.
students that are enrolled. So at a certain point, they're going to be like, you guys need to. I imagine they're going to be like, you guys need to start taking in your full numbers again. But they haven't done that so far. So
Okay. Are you still the lone teacher, or
no. So I mean, under normal circumstances, I am one of 3 in any given semester. So
okay.
it's a 48-hour-a-week class, and there's usually me and 2 part-time instructors
Okay.
teaching those 48 hours.
Okay, gotcha. Given how maybe we've all been refocused to, and I know I brought this up the last time we talked, but how do you see the students changing, the demographics of the students changing? Has that been a process of change?
Not nearly as much as I would have liked, actually.
Mhm.
I thought a kind of, well, let's see. Okay, go back. I think the last time we talked, that year was the first year that we hit double digits in terms of women in the class.
Yep.
But so then we went into 2020, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
We dropped the next year, and then we went into the pandemic. Then
Yeah.
it became kind of pandemic intake, and so it dropped for other reasons. But I think this coming year we're going to be 5 out of the 18, which is still not very high. And I don't know. I kind of thought like the soft approach of just having me as the director
Right.
more of an influence, and it's kind of not. I don't think, or maybe it's very, very slow.
Yeah.
I see that maybe one has to be more explicit and direct about it, I think.
Yeah.
But just up in Port Townsend, and that school is quite explicit and direct in its kind of commitment to diversity. And still, class that I taught had one woman in it. The class that I taught up there, and it was on dovetailing, and I kind of wonder if dovetailing is so. Well, it's maybe not like, doesn't increase one's ability to earn money to
Yep.
be able to cut dovetails. So it's going to be people who are less concerned about their finances, and
Mhm.
so attracts a kind of rich retiree
Yep.
set. Would
Yeah.
lovely people, lots of
Right.
very nice people, but it is a certain demographic, and it's nice when one has diversity. Obviously, that's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
I think you hit on something, and maybe I'm going to put you a little bit in the hot seat because you are in higher education, and you mentioned earlier on something about class, which we don't
Yeah.
talk a lot about. And I think maybe it's my privilege to see it from a wider perspective, given the range of people that I talk to. I talk to, DIY, self-taught, all the way across, has a master's degree in like furniture design. And I've noticed that there is kind of this still wide berth of divide and a classist feel of like, well, I went to higher education, therefore I'm better at this craft than somebody who's, self-taught or pieced together a class here or a class there type thing. Do you think that there's room amongst maybe a place like Krenov, or, I want to say like maybe smaller kind of craft schools, to open up and broaden in and pull in some of that maybe DIY crowd?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I don't necessarily see it that there has to be a huge divide. I think it's more in a way like it's the kind of like one's friends and the circle that one moves in and things like that. I think what I'm most what I think about is making a living from woodworking. And, it's a kind of joke, but it's actually not a joke that, you you come to the Krenov School and your productivity decreases.
Yeah.
Because you're going to make things better. You're going to take a lot more time doing it. And so it's not a kind of like a good economic move.
Yeah.
Bottom line, don't want to like
blow
our cover, but you're doing it for reasons that are not economic. And so that's in itself a privilege, a massive privilege to kind of like invest in oneself and all phrases like that, life enhancement and things like that. And I think that is problematic, really. I mean, all education is to some extent, it's a kind of like delayed gratification. I just don't know that, that you put off your earning years in order to gain an education. And then if you're doing kind of arts education, it's hard to see the direct link, but you do assume there will be some, like putting in an education at this point will probably serve me well in my life later. But in woodworking terms, it kind of doesn't make sense in some ways. And that is hard for me to get my head around, but it means that we are attracting people who are in a pretty financially secure situation. Who can see that, who feel that, their increase in skills or their exploration of this craft is like going to take precedence over their ability to make money. And that's where I see it. I mean, maybe I'm just like, I've sidestepped your question that is more.
I mean, I think you make a valuable point, because I would say which is funny to me, or ironic perhaps, that those that I've talked to that have especially like a master's degree, or above, still do not make their income predominantly on making the thing that they went to school to learn how to make. They make it by so many other avenues. Predominantly teaching is usually.
Well, I mean, I'm a prime example.
I mean, it's like teaching. It's I don't know, running organizations. It's doing everything that still relates, but it's not directly like you make a good and you sell a good. However, those that have started on their own by doing DIY projects, especially around their own home, and just shared that on social media, I know some that are making 6-figure salaries off of what they make.
Well, are they doing it off of what they make, or is at this point are they kind of like YouTube or?
No, there are several that are making it solely off of the product that they make, that they're commissioned to make for others.
So their hand work or their shop work is actually generating. Well, that's amazing. That's great. And I also should just, for those people out there, it's not like you're not going to make a living.
No, but I mean, to be fair, I think it is something to acknowledge. And I think it's something we talk about in this field. It is difficult to make a living just off of woodworking. I think regardless of where you start in that, journey, I think it's just difficult. I mean, it's like my dream to do that. I'm going to go get my master's degree to hopefully get there. But I also understand that probably means I'm still going to have years after that I go into teaching to supplement what I make, because I understand that the real world doesn't usually work the way of like, there's a endless population willing to just give you money to make things for them.
Yes. Why not? Why doesn't it work that way? And where are you going to go to do a master's?
Just my local University of Iowa.
Right.
Yeah, I'm starting in a few weeks from now.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And just to turn the tables a little bit, what are you hoping that you will get from that?
Yeah. Excellent question. One that the director of the program I'm going into asked. And one of the things is I've found that it's really hard, especially in design world. So outside of just making things out of woodworking, the design side of it, it's all about connections, and it's hard to get those connections unless you're like introduced and put up into that world. And so this program specifically does that. So that's one of my things is hopefully I get the connection so that there's people out there then who will buy my stuff that I know of. And then the other piece really is actually to not completely dismantle, but to help break down the barriers or the gatekeeping that can happen for getting into programs like that. Like I'm privileged enough, I have a spouse who makes enough money that we can do this. Like I can stop working. I can go do 2-year program. It's scary as hell about the idea of not making any money. But I can go do that. And so I want to then come out of that and say, okay, these are the things that I learned. Here's some shortcuts for those of you who can't afford to go to college or this master's program to get into selling your designs and becoming a designer, because outside of the craft of woodworking, the industry of design is extremely white and extremely cis het male. And to me, that's a lose for the world. Like there's so many talented designers out there of every different ethnicity and gender and, sexual orientation, all of that we need to broaden the world of design. Whole. So that's kind of my end goal. I don't know how to accomplish that once I'm done with school, but
right. Well, okay, step at a time. Yeah, first get into school and go there, and then take the next steps after that. Yeah, that's interesting. When you use the word design, do you mean design for? Because I think the word design is used in two ways, two complete kind of almost different. One is to think of it as producing a something for mass production, basically.
Correct.
For production, and the other is just kind of like what it looks like,
Right. Yeah. I mean, my focus, like my singular focus, is to have my like studio furniture practice, where it's like very limited. Probably nothing is going to be exactly the same because it's still going to be predominantly handmade, but looking at like types of like this type of table is what I did make, or this type of chair is what I make, doing kind of lines like that. And yeah, when I'm talking design, I'm talking maybe eventually what goes into mass production, which I want to learn a little bit more about. This specific program is 3D design as well. So I'll be learning how to integrate, like I'm getting a CNC. So how do I integrate that into my practice to save time, number one, and become more cost effective, number two.
Is it based in the college, or will you kind of keep your home workshop?
It's based in the college, but I'll have my home workshop. So I have an advantage over all of these other students who are coming in.
Yeah. Well, that's really exciting. I mean, yeah, if nothing else, one meets a new group of people, and that's always interesting. Just
it will be the first time too of like I didn't do art school as my undergrad at all. So it will be my first time of being like critiqued and getting feedback like that. Which even if it's negative, I'm looking forward to, just because I know it will push me to take my design other ways.
Thing. Yeah. I went to architecture school, where crits are a huge part of the kind of educational process. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who in Ireland, he teaches at the school that we all went to. And we were talking about what crits, how they kind of, how helpful or otherwise they were.
Right.
And what they did to us, which is going to sound scary to you, but I think
I've heard it all.
People have got kinder, I think, in general, well, at least in that regard, probably since those days, because it was kind of like somebody cried every single Friday.
Every single time.
Yeah.
I think what I've said, because I've had plenty of people tell me that like that process is hard, and I'm expecting it to be hard, but I've also spent almost 20 years in manufacturing environments, which, as the only queer woman in that space, we'll just say was not kind to me 9 times out of 10. So I feel like I've grown a thick skin and can also
Mm.
understand when feedback is based off of somebody's, I don't know, emotional
Yeah,
state at that
something to do
time.
with them. Yeah.
Yeah, it has
So
to do with them, or if it has to actually, I take what I want, basically. We'll put it that way,
right.
out of
Yeah.
feedback, out of the feedback.
That's a good start. I think somebody told me like way back in those days, crit is short for critique, not for criticism. And I think thinking of it in that sense of like, this is a discussion that has arisen because of what I'm showing you. And in, it kind of depersonalizes it a little bit, not wholly, but
Right.
you think of it as, I've put something up there that is generating this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And separate yourself from the kind of like, I mean, it's for sure hard because you've like put a lot of work into it, but
Right.
at this point it's like a thing that's outside of you that then generates a discussion.
Right. I mean, the other, I think, maybe advantage or disadvantage is I've had at least the last 5 years where I've attempted to be making my own designed work to sell.
Mm-hmm.
When something doesn't sell, that is telling you a little bit that maybe that's not the right design, the right audience, the right whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's feedback in its own. So, sometimes that is hurtful just because I'm like, well, I think it's really cool, but it doesn't mean that other people think it's really cool.
Yeah, it's all very tricky because like maybe it's not the right people, or it's not somehow contextualized.
Yeah.
Like in a different context or a different set of people,
Right.
it might have a completely, as it were, different meaning, and it might be what hits the mark. And then it's chances. So something hits the mark or whatever.
Right.
You don't even know why, and then
Yeah.
something you think is equally as interesting just kind of like passes without notice. It just doesn't hit people in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. What's because we're getting close to the end of our time. So what's some big things or not so big things on your horizon?
Well, I mean, I bought a house, and so I'm kind of slowly doing bits and pieces to the house. That's kind of exciting. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking that I might take a sabbatical in a year or two, and then I will probably try to. That will be a kind of rejuvenation period, I hope. In the meantime, my head is buzzing with some ideas for cabinets, and I have a lot of things that are kind of generated by past work that I want to kind of like. So that project makes me want to do this one, and that project.
Right.
So now I've got like 6 things that I want to do. So yeah, I got some cabinets that I want to make, and I know that's not very exciting for the outside world, but it's what keeps me and teaching, and I think that's it. I in a kind of longer term sense, maybe. Having said that, I didn't like writing. I think I do. There's a part of me that also is interested in. Well, I do find writing is a way of putting my thoughts in order. I just read like one of those like meme things on Instagram the other day that said writing isn't to sort of put your thoughts out there. Writing is the kind of thought doesn't exist until you've written it down. So it's a way of like or getting all the stuff that's going around in your head all the time, trying to like put it into some sort of order. So I think that writing will be part of everything, but what exactly that means, I don't know, because like I say, my writing experience was not super great. So I'll have to find a way that works for me, whatever that means.
Yeah. And I know you and I have talked about, that outside of this stuff, and it's still one of those things that I think is getting closer for me. I'm now kind of getting a little further in my head of like, no, this is what I want it to look like. which I think was what was hard for me is wrapping my head around like what I want it to look like. And I think essentially I want it to look like a book version of the podcast, but of just stories, individual stories that I hope will bring inspiration to others, or maybe permission to others to just try to make something that they don't think they can make, type thing. There's just to me there's a lot of power in that, in learning just a tool. There's a lot of power, empowerment in that for minority groups especially. So I think that's going to come eventually. Hardest part is always writing my part of my story part of that book, and that's what's been holding me up. So
oh really? So what
yes.
You needed someone to interview you then?
Yeah. a sense of well, yeah, there will be me and there will be others, because I don't want it to just be about me. I want it to be about this community that exists, that if you're outside of it, you don't know it exists. So
right. Yeah, and I know that you're quite you kind of like cross the line, not cross the line. You have quite an involvement with the kind of maker community more. Right?
Yeah.
That would be interesting. I don't really, it's something I don't really know that much about. I don't know why really. I mean, I'm like you. There you are. You're all like doing great stuff. How come I don't really know anything about you all? So yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. Like I said, there's definitely this divide, and I don't think, maybe to your point, it's not necessarily intentional. It's just you don't know each other exists. And so hopefully book or this podcast can help bridge that gap for some people to learn more about the different kind of crafts out there and sides, and education available too. Because I think that's a big thing too. To get education doesn't mean you have to go to get like a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree. You can go to places like a Penland and take a class or two, and that will get you farther than just a YouTube, I think.
Yeah, YouTube is great, but it definitely has its limitations.
Yeah. Okay, well, Laura, I want to give you a chance to let people know how to find you, see your work, your boxes especially.
My website's easy because it's my name, lauramays.com, and then my Instagram is Laura B Mays. I do not have a middle name. The B is just a makey uppy thing.
Perfect.
Yeah, those are my two main outlets for things.
Okay, awesome.
Facebook and all the other stuff, and whatever. They're the two places I keep up to date.
Awesome. Well, thanks for chatting today and letting me put you in the hot seat on a couple things.
Of course, yeah, it's fun. Thank you.
All right. So again, that was Laura Mays. I'll include the links on how you can follow along with her, see her latest designs and what she's working on in the show notes for today's episode. Best places to catch that are in the description for the episode on your podcast app, or if you're watching this on Freeman Furnishings YouTube channel, you can check the description box down below. Please follow along, not only with Laura, but also with the podcast at Crafting a Revolution on Instagram, all one word, no spaces, underscores, any of that. So at Crafting a Revolution. Also say hi to your hosts, myself, Katie Freeman at Freeman Furnishings, my co-host, Katie Thompson at Women of Woodworking. We'd love to hear from all of you who listen. So please say hi. And one last shout out and thanks to Ashley Minnie, who wrote and produced and sang the theme song for the podcast. Thank you so much, Ashley. All right, so I will see you all back here with a brand new episode on Wednesday, August 17th. In the meantime, let's go craft a revolution. She, her, and they got something they want to say. Solution for the toxic masculinity.